latest of our webinar. We're really grateful to everybody for joining us today, and really, really grateful to our colleagues who are going to give us their time to give us their sort of insights in order that we can work together for the benefit of children and young people across this district and beyond. What I wanted to do just in these couple of minutes is just flag up the fact that we're working hard to see how we can bring the power of science to the table as we try and support the schools, children and young people as we hit the recovery phase of the sort of a pandemic. And there's 3 studies that I want to sort of flag up in particular, which I think are really quite exciting and showing that we're managing to establish sort of Bradford as the sort of city of research. So one of the studies is a potential sort of study that's heading in our direction. So the Department for Health and Social Care are really interested in looking at the impact of air filters to make buildings safer. So there's actually really, really good evidence that air filters can make rooms COVID sort of secure. And of course, not just COVID sort of secure, but these air filters can reduce generally infections and also clean air, so reduce sort of problems related to asthma. There is a good sort of evidence base around them from the laboratory, but they haven't been properly sort of tested since the 1950s in terms of their efficacy. Clearly now, everybody's got very interested in the potential for these sort of systems to actually make places safer. Thanks to our brilliant colleagues in the DFE, the argument has been one of the places we really want to make safer are our schools. So we're currently in conversations with DHSC to see if we can run a trial in our Bradford sort of schools to put these systems in, which effectively just clean the air. It's as simple as that. So it looks very likely that we will be trying to run a sort of a trial. So we'll be in contact with a number of schools to see if they will be willing to participate. So I think a really exciting opportunity for us to do sort of something special in this sort of space, and hopefully take advantage of this sort of technology from the outset. Second project that I want to flag is the Glasses in Classes. Huge thank you to the 100 schools that are currently supporting the efforts to give children glasses in order to see more clearly, in order to allow them to learn to read more effectively. This trial has just been hit time and time again by COVID, but we're incredibly grateful again to the Department for Education, again to the Education Endowment for a Foundation for continuing to stick with this trial. And we've been very kindly granted extensions to make sure that that works effective. So we will be in contact with sort of schools. And again, just a massive thank you to all the schools that sort of have supported us get this sort of far. The third sort of project to flag up is the work that we're doing on early identification of autism, using those earlier foundation profile scores. So work that was originally trialled with Brilliant Shine Consortium was shown to be really, really effective. We're now scaling it out across 100 schools, hopefully in Bradford. Hopefully a number of schools on this call have been contacted by our team to try and ask for people to embrace this new approach. We do think it's transformative. We think this can really improve the situation with regard to undiagnosed autism in sort of our schools. And it's, again, fantastic that sort of Bradford's really sort of pioneering this new revolutionary approach. So we are proceeding on those sort of 3 sort of projects. They're just examples of what we're trying to do to bring the power of science to help us recover from COVID. So I just wanted to share that with you. What I'll now do is stop sharing my sort of a screen, and I will ask Helen to give us a pediatric insight into how COVID is playing out. So Helen, I can't see you there. Are you on the call?
Yes, I.
Oh, wonderful. Now I see you. Can I hand over to you, Helen?
Yes, really good to see you all again. I'm really pleased to report that from the paediatric wards, we continue to be relatively settled in terms of children coming in with COVID. And I think that's great news for us and really important that you all know that. Our numbers did go up as numbers in the population went up, but actually it was very much just reflecting an overall incidence in the population. The children were actually coming in with other things, and by coincidence we would find that they were positive at that time with COVID. So we have never seen what they've seen in adults, with children coming in with issues with breathing, even for the children that are sick in the background. I'm sure a lot of you will have been reading newspapers at the weekend and will have seen articles about Pim's tea. And I think this is something I've mentioned before. I'm not sure how widely known it is outside of the paediatric world, but Pim's tea is the really snatchily named acronym for I have to read it, the Paediatric Multi-System Inflammatory Syndrome temporally associated with COVID. So I wish I'd been in the room when it was first named, because I struggle even now, a year on. Essentially, this syndrome is, as it says on the tin, it's a syndrome that affects children, and it's an inflammatory syndrome that affects many systems in their body. And what we saw in the first wave of COVID was that we had a peak in the incidence of COVID in the population and in children. And then a couple of weeks down the line, we started getting children coming in with this. And the numbers were never massive. It appears that during this second wave, there have been quite a few more children in London, and it has stood out to the PICUs, the paediatric intensive cares in London, and they've had approximately 100 children admitted during this second wave. Now, we have had a slight increase this time compared to March. So since October, we've had 12 children present with this to Bradford. But I really want to put it in context, because I think there's a danger that this information, if not given in the correct way, will really terrify families and want them to closet their children. So in context, it's round about 1 child a week that we're getting with this. The children will all be children that parents, through their natural instincts, would bring to us anyway. They're children who look unwell with really quite a high temperature. Most of them will have abdominal pain and vomiting or diarrhea. But the key thing is this really quite impressive temperature. It's not just oh, I think they're a bit hot. You know, these children look poorly and parents are worried about them. A lot of them actually come to us with people thinking they've got appendicitis. It's that sort of presentation that we get. Some of them may have unusual rashes, but again, almost every child with high temperature and rash will come to us. They are quite complicated for us to manage, and that's probably why it's in the media a bit, but they're complicated because it involves us talking to colleagues with a cardiology and a rheumatology expertise and putting those specialties together. And a lot of these children, we will make decisions to start treatment, immunoglobulins, and they're going into research trials, and they will be well enough within a couple of days to go home again. Some of the children will go over to Leeds to intensive care, but even our sickest children have been out of intensive care within a couple of days. So yes, it's something that we're taking really seriously. As a group of paediatricians, we're on national conferences about this and ensuring we're giving the best possible care. But to put it in context, I was on the ward last week and I had one of these cases. I also had 2 children with new diagnoses of cancer that I was really pleased had come in and asked for help. And probably more importantly, I had 3 to 4 really significant cases of safeguarding and 2 teenagers with significant cases of self-harm and overdose. So I guess my message for parents is please seek help when you're worried, particularly with temperatures. We are here, we have the capacity to help, we're not overflowing like adult colleagues, but also please don't feel you have to wrap your children up, you know, as it becomes the right time to get children back to school. You know, we want them back at that stage when it's right with transmission in the community. If you see opportunities to look after the mental health of your children, you know, getting them out each day, we want them out walking around and things. We don't want them out. You know, the other thing to put into context is I saw a child this morning where the family were describing they hadn't been out of the house since lockdown at all, not even into the garden. And that sort of has a massive impact. I also saw 3 children in the last 2 weeks who've gained 15 kilos since October. So I really want to get Pim's tea in, I guess, in perspective with the harm that I'm seeing and the massive challenges for families at home. Is there any questions about Pim's tea before I move on to other things? I'll keep moving on, but please, if there's, I can see what I'll come back to the, let me just get the chat up. Sorry. Yeah, if anyone puts anything in the chat that you want answering. The last point about Pim's tea is just, you'll have read in the media about it affecting BAME children more out, and that is what we're seeing in Bradford. 90% of our children that have been affected, around about 90% are of BAME origin. So we're seeing that pattern in Bradford as well. The only other thing I wanted to mention, and I feel that this is going to be something that will go with me to the end of my career, is shielding. My colleagues look at me every time I mention it. When I last came to you, I said we were working our way through the list of any child that was on the shielded list. And I was really, really happy at Christmas that we'd gone through that list. We'd phoned every family at home to say, you don't need to be on this list, and we'd taken them off. And then in January, I got sent my list to check, and I very confidently opened it thinking, I'm glad I went through this. And there was another 400 children on it. There is something wrong with the system. And we think that flags are being used that are relevant for adults, but are putting children without any clinician oversight back on the shielding list. So every week, it takes a couple of weeks for the data to get to me. Every week, a clinician is phoning these families saying, you've been put on this through an algorithm, you're not meant to be on it, we're taking you off. And so just if you hear of families getting really worried about letters, please just encourage them to phone their clinicians and reassure them that actually nobody is going on that shielding list without us letting them know and explaining the implications. And the numbers are really small. There are 30 to 40 children overall that we think should be on it. And the last bit is immunisations. I think the immunisation advice for children, actually Duncan may have more on this, and please feel free to come in if you feel differently, but the initial stance was that there weren't vaccines licensed for children under the age of 16, and they weren't in the top categories identified by the government. So we were saying to our families, don't worry about immunisation. The Green Book, which is our sort of Bible, if you like, our reference guide for immunisations, was updated very recently, saying that in some special care settings for children with neurodisability and significant respiratory compromise, there may be some benefit, but that this would be off licence. And that has only just changed. So I'm currently working with my colleagues and trying to work across Yorkshire and to get some national guidance on that before we take any action on it. Oh, Duncan's ahead of me. I'm going to leave this for Duncan. Thank you. Do you want to come in there, Duncan, or do you want to put that in your bit?
You're on mute, Duncan.
I haven't got any additional information on that, Helen, I'm afraid.
Okay, so as we hear something, we'll come back to you, but I think it is just that really small subset of children that we're investigating, and everybody else at the moment is, that we're not concerned about immunisation in children, but if there are trials looking at this in the future, the Bradford team are keen to be part of that.
Thank you. So Helen, there's a question in the chat from Christian, which is there any further information about guidance in distinguishing childhood COVID from common cold?
So no further official guidance. I think I'd continue just to say my experience on the wards is that even when some children just have, for example, headache and sore throat, but they've come in with other measures into hospital, we're being surprised and finding them being positive. And therefore, for me, there's a little bit about being suspicious when any children have any symptoms. At the same time, we haven't seen evidence of when children have got that, it being transmitted to other family members or staff members. So in terms of how infectious they are when they're like that, Duncan, again, will be probably better placed to answer that. I work with my children that if they're unwell, I'm very cautious with them and I make them socially distance whilst they're corizal, even if they're not hitting those salient features that get them tested of pyrexia and cough.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that, Helen. So Helen's going to stay on for another 10 minutes. If anyone's got any other questions for Helen, if they can just put them in the sort of chat, and Helen will do her best to answer them. So wonderful. Thank you so much, Helen. It's really useful getting that sort of paediatric sort of viewpoint. What we'll do now is get the public health perspective. So Duncan, can I hand over to you, please?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. So me and George are going to do a bit of a double act here today, over about 20 minutes. And the good news is that you've got one more day after today until half term. So hopefully you've got some sort of a break then. I know there's loads of stuff you do over half term as well, but at least hopefully it's going to be a bit of a break. But my cycles have been going on school terms as well over the last 6 months as well. So I'm looking forward to next week as well for that reason. Okay, so what I want to do today is to give you a quick update on infection rates across Bradford like I usually do. And then there's not a huge amount I can tell you about vaccination of teachers, but I'll quickly update you on that. And then there's a couple of other issues that have come up from questions that we've had back on multiple occasions from schools this week as well. So just to go over the data to start with, and I'll put all this in a summary as well tomorrow that can come to you via the usual channels, is that the overall infection rate for Bradford is falling slowly. So it's 216 per 100,000. And it's falling in all age groups now, all adult age groups, but it's leveled out for young children. So the rates are still lower for children. So if you think about that, it's 216 for Bradford. In the 0 to 3-year-olds, the rate is 104, so it's about half that. For the primary school age children, 4 to 10, it's 108. And then for secondary schools, it's a bit higher, it's 147. So all those three age groups are still below the overall adult infection rate. What the national analysis has shown as well is that areas, big urban areas with high levels of poverty, the rates are falling a lot slower than they are in the more rural and affluent parts of Britain, which is perhaps what we'd expect. But since the start of the new lockdown, there's definite evidence emerging for that. And we think that that's caused by a mixture of things. So places like Bradford, it's dropping, but not as quickly as other bits of Yorkshire. And it's to do with a greater population density, and we've got more multi-generational living within Bradford. We've probably got a higher proportion of frontline and key workers as you do in urban areas. And then the other thing is the lack of financial support for some people that are needing to isolate. And this is the thing about testing, is that we think about testing, it's part of a pathway. Somebody has to be persuaded to go forward to get a test, then have a test, and then self-isolate. So it's a full cycle. It's not just about the test itself. And you'll know with some of your families that if they're desperate for money and they need to keep working. So this is one of the things that we lobby the government about, is that testing is part of a pathway. But the overall infection rate's falling, which is good news. The numbers of people in hospital in Bradford Royal Infirmary and Airedale is falling as well. So that's down to about 150 patients now in both those hospitals. And compared to 2 or 3 weeks ago when we were well over 200, that's dropping quite quickly, which is really good news. The mortality rate and the number of deaths from COVID, it is level at about 40 a week, but our data is always 2 or 3 weeks behind. So we only know how many people have died up till the end of January. But we do get some more up-to-date information from the local registrar who records all the deaths for Bradford District. And the most recent data seems to be showed that the death rate is plateauing as well, and maybe even starting to come down a bit. So the indicators are going in the right direction for Bradford. The areas with the highest infection rates are still the areas in the centre of the city, and then there also seems to be this band of wards to the southeast and south of the city as well. So Queensbury, Wyke, Tong, that sort of area, there seems to be some quite stubbornly high infection rates this week as well. So that's just to say that, so it's central and southern Bradford where we've got the highest rates. And the other thing is that we're still seeing transmission in schools and community cases coming into schools. So we've got 46 schools at the moment that are on our database as having 2 or more cases in the last couple of weeks. So even though the vast majority of children are at home, obviously, the fact that we've got quite high percentages of children in some of the primary schools and in special schools as well still means that we're getting some outbreaks, and we've been supporting schools, some of the special schools and pupil referral units over the last couple of weeks with outbreaks. But There has been some research that's come through as well about transmission within schools, and I know that we've always given this message to you that it's a mixture of community transmission and in-school transmission, but it's actually been quantified now. Public Health England have analysed data from over 30 outbreaks, and they've looked at all the transmission that's gone on in school and the potential routes for that transmission. And what their conclusion is that 50% of cases of people that have caught COVID from being in a school environment is between staff and other staff. So 50% of it is a staff-to-staff route. 23% of it is staff then giving the infection to students. 20% of it, so a fifth, is students giving infections back up to staff. And then there's a really low percentage, 7%, from students to students. So the risk of receiving and getting a COVID infection from a pupil in the school is not zero, unfortunately, but it does seem to be low compared to the other routes. So I just wanted to let you know about that. The other thing, just on the vaccination programme, so the headline this week from the Bradford programme is that over 100,000 people in Bradford district have had their first dose of the COVID vaccine now, which is really good news. The majority of that's in the over 70s, so 90% of eligible people in the over 80s group have now had the first dose, which is really, really good news, and testament to all the work that the NHS teams are doing as well. The reason why it's focused on those first cohorts is that 90% of all COVID deaths have been in people over 70 or health and social care staff. So that's why those groups have been prioritised during phase 1 of vaccination programme, and it's been nationally prescribed to us. We have managed to include some special school staff within that initial vaccination programme, but we're now going to be moving in February to phase 2 of the national programme. And what we're going to be looking for is the direction from the West Yorkshire Partnership, so this is the NHS Partnership for West Yorkshire, about where teachers fall within that and school staff fall within that prioritisation. So what we're hoping to do is it's going to be really difficult to make decisions just for Bradford on this, but what we're hoping for is a pretty strong clear on a West Yorkshire basis about where you fit into the prioritisation of the next round of vaccinations. So sorry that I can't give you anything more definitive on that yet as well, but that's a decision that we hope to get. But we've still got 4 weeks at the earliest when schools open fully in March, and the vaccination programme can move really quickly when it needs to. So I still think there is time for that, and we'll keep you up to date on that if possible. But I think a key message though is that the total vaccination programme, as it moves down through the age cohorts and vaccinates the entire adult population, that will take months to roll out. So all the basics that you do in infection control, there's really, really strong evidence that face, space, hands, making sure that cases and contacts are identified quickly, that really does reduce transmission infection within school. So it's all the basics. You've just got to keep going with them, I'm afraid. And I know it's huge amounts of effort to keep on top of that, but that's what we've got to do, unfortunately. So it's a mixture of the basics and the vaccination programme. So that's just a really quick update on that. The other thing that I just wanted to flag up, particularly for secondary schools, is the waste disposal from LFT, the rapid tests. So you've had the guidance within the standard operating procedures about packaging. So there's the general waste packaging, and then there's the offensive and clinical waste that needs to go into yellow bags and double bags and tiger bags and so on. But and we were talking to head teachers this week from primary and secondary, and Hanson's doing a lot of testing already. And if you think about the percentage of kids and the amount of waste that generates from LFTs, that's happening already with maybe 10 or 15% of kids in schools. The government initiative is obviously for secondary schools to roll out testing to all pupils or offer all pupils. What we really need you to do is to start thinking about the volumes of waste that are going to come out of that particular scheme. So, for example, if you've got 1,000 children and 200 staff that require testing twice a week, that's 2,400 tests. If you only get 50% opt-in, that's still 1,200 tests a week spread over a 5-day period. That's a testing programme the size of some of our community testing centres. It's really big. So what I'd advise, I'm sure a lot of you have already, but really start thinking about the volume of waste that's going to need to be taken away, stored in the school. You might need to upscale your contracts that you've got with existing waste providers. This is a nationwide issue. It's a district-wide issue as well, because we're also rolling out rapid testing to businesses. So what I'm doing is I'm looking into alternative waste providers, how the NHS disposes of such large amounts of waste and so on, to see if there's any additional support that we can get for schools. So that's just really something to sort of really think about, because having huge amounts of waste lying about on a school premises that you haven't got a contract set up to take it away on a regular basis is a health hazard in itself, and we want to avoid that. So really start thinking about it, and if you just can't do it, we need to start hearing about those concerns. We're flagging that up nationally to the DFE as well, because as you know, sometimes these policy initiatives come through before they've really been thought out operationally. So we've just got to start thinking about it as a district together, I think, and communicating with each other on that one. So I just wanted to mention that. And for your early years providers as well, I'll put the link in the school message tomorrow, but there's a national scheme now for any employer over 50 staff. There's a website and you can sign up to LFT to get LFTs sent through to you as well. So there's some of your separate nurseries or preschool clubs and things like that that may be suitable, but possibly not if it's 50 plus staff, because they're going to be quite small. So that's on the LFTs. And then the other thing that we'll do this week as well is we've had quite a few questions back about vaccination and pregnancy and clinical vulnerability in vaccination. So there's a member of my team that's put together a briefing on for breastfeeding women, people thinking about starting a family, and for pregnant women and vaccination. So we've put in some really clear guidance, and there's a short attachment that we'll send tomorrow to you about that. So that's all I wanted to update on before I hand over to Georges. And George is going to try and work through what some of the testing guidance is, when to have a test, when to not have a test. But I think before we come on to this, it's just to let you know that if you think about all these different rules and guidance around testing, we've got primary, secondary, special schools, we've got PCR tests, LFT tests. Should you or shouldn't you do a test if you've had an infection within 90 days, different sets of symptoms? It's impossible to produce simple guidance and simple flow charts for all of those particular potential scenarios that might come up in a school. So, and you've all become experts now, so we do trust you to make the right decision, and what we try to do is send out principles basically for you to run your schools by. We'll try and answer all the questions, because we do get a lot of quite complicated emails about whether staff can come back to school or what tests they should have. We'll try and answer them all as quickly as possible. But I suppose what I'm saying is that we try and prioritise supporting schools around specific outbreaks if there's a real issue, and to try and get the big global issues sorted for schools in Bradford. Send us an email by all means, but what I'm saying really is we completely trust you to make the right decision based on the principles that you've got. So I'll hand over to Georges now, and then if there's any other questions, I'll have a look in the chat while Georges is speaking, and I can try and answer some of those afterwards. So over to you, Georges.
Thanks, Duncan, and good to see your faces after some time. I missed the last webinar. What I'm trying to do today is to put together most of the queries that arrived from the schools in the last 2 months or 1.5 months about everything that has to do with the lateral flow testing. But it's not about lateral flow testing, but also relationship between testing and vaccines, difference between PCR and LFD tests. So I try to put this into a single page graphic, because I think most of my work with you has been trying to merge all this guidance into simple and actionable charts. So let me just share my screen here with you. Just a moment. Okay. Can you see it? Okay. So the idea here is that, can you see my pointing arrow here? Because I'll start by the top left corner. So although we should start by secondary or primary setting here, we'll start before that, because one common query that has arrived for us is, if someone has already tested positive with COVID, mainly in the last 90 days, the previous advice is that if someone has tested positive for COVID, this person should not do an asymptomatic test again. They should only be tested if showing symptoms. A lot of doubt has arisen about this, and our current advice is that if someone has tested positive in the last 19 days, either with a PCR or with a lateral flow testing, our advice is not to engage in the asymptomatic testing program for a number of reasons, because of the high chance of false positives, because of the remaining viral fragments, and also because with those false positives, we would possibly go into a cycle of unnecessary self-isolation and operational issues with the schools that will not help us to halt the transmission of COVID in the community. So our advice is that if someone has tested positive in the last 19 days, do not engage in the twice weekly asymptomatic testing, but if has close contact with someone with COVID, follow the usual guidance and self-isolate for 10 days. If this person has symptoms, book a test as usual, follow the usual guidance. And if by any chance someone decides against this advice to take a lateral flow test or any other rapid test, either a home-based test or school or community center-based COVID test, and if this person tests positive, then they should follow all the usual guidance. Although we know that there is a high chance of being a false positive, once the person has tested positive by using this test, they should self-isolate for 10 days. We need to do contact tracing and everything else that we would do with a confirmed COVID case. So that's why our advice is not to test unless you have symptoms within this 9 days window. Out of this 90 days window, if someone has tested positive for COVID more than 3 months ago or has never tested positive for COVID, our current advice for schools is to then engage in the asymptomatic lateral flow testing program. So staff in most primary schools or all primary schools are receiving home test kits, and in secondary schools, they're doing school-based kits. School-based tests. We are not discussing today all the operational issues that are involved in the return after half term and in the mass testing of all the children and staff in school. What we are going to discuss today is basically what to do with those people who are already engaged in a testing program in school, either primary or secondary setting, and if this person tests positive, what are the next steps? So for secondary schools, the pathway is very straightforward because recent advice from Public Health England has made PCR and lateral flow tests equivalent if the lateral flow test has been conducted in a supervised center. So if the person has tested in a community center or in the school with someone who was trained delivering or supporting the test, then this test is considered equivalent to a PCR test. This is because of the high prevalence of COVID in the community, the high transmissibility of the new strain, and because of all these numbers that Duncan is talking about, we are taking this more straightforward pathway, and after positive school test, a lateral flow test, the procedure is exactly the same as with a positive PCR. So the person should identify household and school contacts, self-isolate everybody for 10 days, and stay for 10 days also out of circulation. One important point here that is something that a number of teachers have asked us as well is when do self-isolation begins? If self-isolation will still begin with the lateral flow test or if any confirmatory PCR test is needed. So again, the lateral flow test, if taken in a supervised setting, is considered equivalent to a PCR test, and this person does not need a confirmatory PCR. So we should take action from the positive lateral flow test. This is mainly the advice for secondary schools that are conducting tests within the schools. But for primary schools, the picture is a little bit more complicated, and that's why I'll concentrate most of the guidance. So if the test is taken at home, if a teacher or a staff member has tested at home and the test is positive, we need to treat this not as a confirmed COVID case, but as a suspect COVID case. It's the same as if the person had COVID symptoms. This person will still need a confirmatory test with a PCR. will still need a PCR confirmatory test before being tagged as a confirmed COVID case. So if the home test is positive, this person is a suspect case and should still book a PCR test to confirm the situation. If the PCR confirms the lateral flow test, that will happen in most of the times, then it's the same procedure. So self-isolate for 10 days and identify and trace contacts both in the household community and in the school setting. And here is an important bit of this new situation. If someone tests with a home test and is considered a suspect case, we should act exactly as we act when someone has symptoms. The household contacts should self-isolate from the lateral flow test while waiting for the PCR test, but the school contacts are not still isolated because it's not a confirmed case. So this is a suspect case that needs confirmation. After the confirmation with a PCR, then we should do the contact tracing and advise self-isolation for all the school contacts. And then this self-isolation needs to run back to the lateral flow testing. So this is the complicated bit. I'll kind of stress and repeat this. So if someone tests positive with a home test, this person needs a confirmatory PCR. If the PCR confirms the lateral flow test, isolation of contacts starts counting back 48 hours from the first positive test. We need to assume that the PCR is only confirming the result of the lateral flow test and that this person is infective since 48 hours before this test. So the household contacts will already be advised to self-isolate because this is the advice for symptomatic people. And the school contacts will then retrospectively be identified and self-isolate from the first test. We do understand that this can have some issues. For example, it can take some time to the PCR test to be conducted. If in any of these situations there are a high probability that this suspect case is really a positive case, for example, in some situations we have dealt with a growing number of cases in the same class as enough evidence for recommending a precautionary isolation of these contacts. But this is a case-by-case decision. So the formal guidance is to wait for the PCR. If it's a special situation in which there is a high suspicion that the case is really a positive one, then we would recommend you to look for our advice, to specialized advice from the public health team at the local authority, and we would treat this as a joint decision case by case based on clinical and epidemiological data, and also in the vulnerability of the children and staff. So in some situations, for example, we have lowered the bar for precautionary isolation in special settings, for example, in schools with a number of children vulnerable, clinically vulnerable, for example. But again, we would advise that we follow this guidance and treat exceptions as exceptions and discuss case by case with public health advice. The last bit is there are some floating blocks here that is advice of what to do if the tests, the lateral flow tests, are negative or indeterminate. So if the test is negative, we should continue routine testing and all preventive measures as normal. So if someone is taking a test twice a week and the test is consistently negative, we should consider this person as a negative case, but we should not consider this person as someone who is protected from COVID or exempt from COVID. This is very important because people can feel this negative test as a kind of a passport for, you know, freedom of all the social restrictions, and so it's very important to stress that a negative lateral flow testing does not mean that this person can relax on social distance, use of face coverings, washing hands, and all the measures that have protected us from COVID up to now. If the test is indeterminate, because in some cases the test is not clear if it's a positive or negative test, our advice is to repeat the test with a different kit, but in most of the cases to look for some specialist advice as well. Because, for example, if it's a home test, we can recommend a PCR or school-based test. If it's a school-based test, we can recommend a PCR. So it's a situation that if you have doubt, we recommend looking for our advice as well. So indeterminate tests are a tricky situation to deal with, even for public health and medical staff. So this is just a highlight of a situation that has occurred as well in some schools. The last thing, the other floating block here is about the relationship between vaccines and tests. So the current advice is that if someone has received a shot, if someone because of clinical condition or age, for example, has already received vaccine, first or even the 2 doses of the vaccine, this person should still keep engaged in the routine lateral flow testing. First, because the vaccine is not expected to affect the results. So the test will still be positive or negative regardless of the vaccination status. And second, because this is also a way of us, in a way, assessing, for example, if the routine vaccination is reducing or not the incidence in schools. So if we see that after vaccination, people are still testing positive with the lateral flow test, for example, this is a situation for us to check and to discuss in other forums. So the advice is basically, if you receive a vaccine, keep engaged in the routine testing. So I assume that there is a lot of blank areas and gray areas here. And in fact, I was discussing with Duncan that this is less a decision tree than a rhizome. So I just for fun, a rhizome is kind of what you see in a ginger root, for example. So it's a flow that has collateral arrows that gives rise to other issues. So it's basically a plant which roots give rise to a new plant. So this is confusing for us, and this is confusing for you. I hope that this kind of diagram has made it clear for you, and I'm available for any doubts.
That's fantastic. Thanks, George. So can I ask if anybody's got any questions? While people just formulate their questions, Duncan, there's a couple of questions for you in this chat. So one of them relates to variants, and the other is a comment from Ruth about sharing guidance around pregnancy instead of a vaccine. But if we can take the variant questions first of all. So Christian said there's some worrying stories in the media about new variants being more likely to infect children. Is this true?
Okay. So what happened is that they started to understand about the new variant that originated in Kent last sort of autumn. It was September that it seems to have started, and by Christmas it was already dominating the case finding. So there was a lot of stuff in the news about it being more infectious in children. What we concluded in the end, and Public Health England concluded, is that the new variant is more infectious in all age groups. And that seems to be the conclusion for the South African variant as well. So the reason why there was a lot of media about it being particularly affecting children is because, put simply, children were the biggest group that was still socially mixing within school before Christmas. So the proportion of cases in children did go up prior to Christmas, but that was for the original COVID virus and the new variant virus. So I think that's the thing to say, that it's more infectious in all age groups, but not particularly children. And in terms of the severity as well, with the new variant and the old variant, children, is still very, very rare that you get serious illness, as Helen's just described, from COVID infection. It tends to be underlying vulnerabilities that cause serious infection in children. And that's the same for the new variant and the old variant as well. So unfortunately, it's just a more infectious variant for everybody, not particularly for children. But children seem to have lower viral shedding, so they are less infectious once they do get the new infection with the new variant than adults. So they will, on the whole, be less infectious, and that's what's leading to lower transmission rates between children and adults in schools. And then the other question was about sharing the pregnancy briefing. I'll do that. I'll pass that on to you, Ruth, after this meeting.
Great, thanks, Duncan. And again, we will be circulating all this information that's talked about here. George is going to be sending around the diagram and a slide about rhizomes. Great, thanks very much. So we've got a question here from Liz, perhaps George, Duncan. Should staff in primary schools continue with LFT during half term?
I think if you've got tests, that would be a good idea. If you think about the incubation period, which could be up to a week, I think it'd be a good idea to continue to do that. It's not going to do any harm.
Great, thank you. And I see lots of nods from George. George, this question specifically to you from Rob, which is the FAQ sent through from the DFE state that we should send close contacts home immediately if someone tests positive with an LFT. Would you be able to clarify that?
Yeah, there is indeed some contradiction among the national guidance, and this is a point that we discussed with our partners in Public Health England as well. So if the lateral flow test was non-supervised, it's considered a suspect positive and not a confirmed positive. So this is why we recommend not self-isolating close contacts immediately. I think there is a kind of a gap in this, even in the facts from the DFE, because I don't know if it's clear if this lateral flow test refers to supervised or non-supervised tests. If the test has been conducted in a supervised center, in the school or community center, then it is now considered equivalent to a PCR and everybody should self-isolate from the test. But if the test was conducted at home, what the national guidance from public health says is that the result is less reliable because the collection is less reliable, and reporting is also not so reliable. So they still recommend that we have a confirmatory PCR. If we are to have a confirmatory PCR, that means that this test is only a suspect case for now. So I know that is contradictory, and I understand that in some situations we will have to make an individual decision for the DFE side, for example. So it's possible that in some situations, depending on the suspicion, we will recommend isolation of the contacts immediately after the home positive lateral flow testing. But this is what we have been able to discuss up to now with Public Health England and with our local consultants, and it's something that can change over time, but it's our current advice.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, George. Right, so I think we're pretty much on schedule, which has got to be a first. So I'm going to hand over to Ruth now, who's going to be giving us the educational sort of psychology perspective, giving us an update on support from her team. So Ruth, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Mark. I think Katie's going to put some slides up. Katie, are you around somewhere? Oh, she is marvelous. Okay, so this is just really a really brief update, because I've talked the last 2 times about supporting staff wellbeing during COVID-19, and we talked about what this might look like, and I've now managed to sort of like nail that down and have a really clear view of what it's going to look like. So if you just go to the first slide, Katie, please. And so what we're doing is that from the work that we do in schools, we're really clear that school staff are struggling in lots of cases. And just due to the sort of like the longevity and this sort of like the ongoing sort of like need to sort of like maintain that momentum and maintain their resilience, and it's just hard going for people. So the program that we've put together is for senior managers to look at and support the staff in their schools, and a lot of it is about making sure that they'll already be doing lots of these things. So it's about providing some reassurance to them that what they're doing is probably the right things, and helping them just do a bit of a stock take of is there anything else that we need to be doing to support staff wellbeing. And then on the back of that, we've also put in a PERMA intervention, which is an intervention it's a positive psychology intervention, really looking at how do individuals make really small steps of reflection and intervention in their own lives to try and help build and maintain their resilience whilst we get through this period of time. So Katie, the next slide, please. So how this is going to work is that once a month, and there's actually 2 in March because I thought we'd kickstart it. Once a month, there's going to be an introductory consultation for school leaders. It'll be a webinar to basically just talk through what is this program, what's it going to look like, and how would it work in my school. So anybody who is thinking that they could do with some additional support around staff wellbeing, you need to book on to one of those webinars, and they're going to go through until July. So you don't need to think and do it immediately. You can pick it up at any point during the remainder of the school year. And so once we've done that, there's an audit link to that to help you just think through what are the key issues for me and what are we hoping to achieve here. And then if you decide to go ahead with that, there's then a pre-recorded video workshop for the school leaders to take them through that auditing of what they're already doing and how that's sort of like how that's working out and whether there are other things. and also to take them through that PERMA action plan about how do we use PERMA in our school. So the video will be about an hour long, but there'll be activities linked to that for the senior leaders to do, whoever it is within the school. In primary school, it might be the head and the senior management team. In secondary school, it might be whoever's leading on staff wellbeing. So the follow-on from that is that there are 5 pre-recorded PERMA video workshops for any member of staff within school. And I think from reflection and working with doing some pilot project with some schools, I think it's going to be voluntary. It has to be voluntary, really. If members of staff feel that this is going to be useful for them, they can then use these 5 really short 20-minute videos to work through some of the elements of resilience and supporting around development. And the final bit of the package is that once a month there will be a webinar for senior leaders to come on to just talk through, okay, so we've done the first bit, or we've done this bit, not quite sure how this is working, or we did this bit and somebody asked me a question and didn't know what the answer was. There's sort of open some discussion webinars for people to drop into if they need any additional support around PERMA or around any elements of the programme. So Katie, next slide, please. So I think I just did see somebody flashed up, how do we book on? So all of this is going to be on Skills for Bradford from 15th of February. So you log in Skills for Bradford and it will be on the educational psychology page, and I'll put it on a banner as well, so it should be really obvious. If anybody wants to ask a question about it or has got any queries, you can email me or you can give me a call. And I think the question people asked before was about the cost. So this is funded at the minute through COVID recovery, so there is no cost to school at this point in time and until summer, definitely. Okay, that's the end of me. I think I don't need any more.
Brilliant, thanks, Ruth. So there's a question here from Sheen, which is how do we book onto the webinars?
Yeah, so it's on Skills for Bradford. So most schools use Skills for Bradford, so just get onto there. But it won't be there until 15th of February, so don't be going on too soon.
Okay,
it's my half-term job. It's my half-term job.
What fun you're going to have. So Schools for Bradford, again, anything, do use our sort of our email address and we'll sort of share that, but hopefully you'll see it there. Excellent, thanks Ruth. If anybody's got any other questions for Ruth, if they can put them in the chat, because what we'll do now is go across to Christian and possibly Alex as well, who are going to talk to us about the school staff wellbeing support service. So over to you, Christian.
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm going to start off with some really good news in a sense. If you remember that the school staff wellbeing support service, Swoosh, was a response to the requests made from this meeting that you were concerned about each other's well-being and that of school leaders, and so we acted on that to provide kind of like pretty much instant access to a well-being check and to an offer of talking therapy support for school leaders, and that's been accessed, quite rapidly. Really, we think we have sufficient places for about 60 to 70 school leaders. It depends on the nature of their needs and how much we will need to support them, and we look to have kind of like offered and supported about 40 colleagues from that. Following a conversation I had today, we can extend that offer now to school teachers as well, and it's the same telephone number, 01535 288 335 or 01535 288 332. So those numbers are now available for immediate access for staff you're worried about at school, who would like a well-being check. And just to run through with you what that looks like, it's a well-being check in the first instance. As a result of that, no further, support might be needed. People just might want to take a temperature check on what they're feeling at the moment, and that's absolutely fine. Some may be referred on to other mental health support services, or it might be mental health support services for a family member if they're worried about a family member. So they can signpost you on that wellbeing check to other mental health support services. However, there's the offer of 6 or maybe as many as 12 counselling or other talking therapy sessions, and that's now available for teachers. I think we've got about enough funding to support 100 colleagues from across Bradford, and that's ready to be accessed from now. So that's a really powerful offer. Exactly what we're trying to do through this COVID webinar series is have a proper join, a healthy, sensible join between the CCG, between academic researchers, between the local authority, including public health, and between the school system. So that offer is now live today. Clear that we're listening to what you're saying. You said that you were concerned about school leaders, not talking about yourselves, other colleagues in your school, your deputy, your assistant head, whatever that might look like. But you're also saying we're worried about or want to have an offer there for our staff. So that's ready to go today. And just reminding everybody that that's self-referral. You can provide this information to staff. You do not need to refer them as a school leader. They refer themselves and they can access that support in a way. The same offer is coming on stream. I'm thinking now at the beginning of next month in terms of accessing the group therapy and other courses through the Seller Trust offer. And again, that's for all school staff. The same information that was there previously about the grief and loss pathway and the other, I suppose, universal offer to people in West Yorkshire is still available. And so there's still ability to people to be able to access that. We will send around again to all the people who've been on the call tonight or who have registered for the call, the School Staff Welfare Support Scheme, the Swoosh offer leaflet. It's a really powerful offer, and we're trying to do our best to provide support for colleagues who are right on the front line and doing some incredible work across Bradford. We're hoping for early March to have the launch of the peer-to-peer message board service as well, reaching out where school colleagues will be able to talk to each other as well about particular issues and attend mini webinars. That's all from me in terms of my input today, but I thought that's really good news from us and a really powerful offer for Bradford teacher colleagues. If all those places go, that's a problem that I'm happy to have, because we'll just go and do what we can to provide further offers in that place. Okay.
Fantastic. Thank you, Christian. Thanks so much for pushing this sort of forward. I think it just speaks to the power of what we can do when we all just sort of work together for the common sort of a good. And one partner, of course, that we didn't mention there is the Department for Education, have also been fantastically sort of supportive. So really everybody at every sort of scale coming together. Thank you, Christian, and thank you, Alex, for that. And this segues in really nicely. We're just going to have our head teacher spots now, sort of 5 minutes from each of our head sort of teachers, very much giving us the view from the ground. And we're going to hear from Lynette, first of all, who's actually going to be talking to us about the best way to make use of Swoosh. So, Lynette, can I hand over to you? You media star, you.
Yeah, thanks, Mark, and thanks, Christian, for updating us. And congratulations to everybody. It is one more sleep to go and we have made it to a little break. I can hear the wine glasses clinking and the wine chilling, I'm sure, in the fridge at the moment. I mean, if that's just me, fine. I've talked a lot in these Zooms about mental health, well-being, because it is something that I am passionate about from my own experiences, from those of my family as well. So it's really great that this offer has been put together. You know, it's taken COVID to put this offer together, but who knows what the future holds for us, and this is something that actually might be taken on into the future. Who knows? Christian, we'll leave that in your capable hands, I'm sure. From the way that we've used the Swoosh offer and really support the wellbeing of staff in school is that we really believe it is about the culture of the school, and it isn't just something that we're doing now, it's something that we weave through our everyday practice. We've seen a real increase in mental health issues among staff, particularly since the beginning of January and this lockdown. It has been beyond hard for all of us, and I've probably found this the hardest half term of my career so far as well. and we're becoming more and more aware about that. I think it's really about knowing what is out there to support our teachers, our leaders in school. And it's about the relationship you have with them and being able to identify when somebody's not quite themselves. Accessing counselling or anything for your own well-being, teachers, I think they naturally put other people before themselves. It's what we do. So for a teacher or a leader to need that level of help or be asking for help is a really bold move to make. The really good thing about the service that the Swoosh offer is that it's a self-referral. And although we're putting those details out there, and all our HR partners at Pennine, they all have those details so that they can identify people, but it is a self-referral service and staff are accessing it. And what I found really reassuring is the confidence in staff to come back to me and say thank you, and how fast that service has been, that they've been in contact on a Wednesday and by Friday they've already had their kind of a temperature check, as Christian described it. That there seems to be a real relief amongst the staff that have used it, I've got someone to talk to, and somebody that's not work related to talk to as well has been really helpful for them. It gives a different perspective. We've done other things alongside the Swoosh, like we've increased our number of staff in school with mental health first aid. We've got lots of that training going on at the moment, but also mental health first aid for children as well, so that we are ready for that when our schools reopen and our children are back in the building. We're looking at kind of setting up wellbeing working parties so that we can really make sure that offer is strong through school, and we continue to push the Swoosh offer. We talk about it a lot. I give a Friday afternoon update to staff at Crossley Hall. It reminds me of what I imagine it would like to be a radio show host. I do shout out of the week on a Friday, which is getting longer and longer as it goes. But I always talk in that about looking after yourself. It is always a thread of those conversations and where staff can access things as well. I think that a big thing about how to use Swoosh effectively now is really getting the foundations of it there, because what we don't know is what people are going to be like as we recover from COVID. And I've said before that whether we're going to experience levels of post-traumatic stress, I found that the times that I've stopped and taken some time for myself, those are the times that I found the hardest, because it provides me with the space to think, and I guess the reality of the situation has become more real. But the Swoosh offer there, if we get that right now and we get that publicised and absorbed amongst staff, and they know it's there to access, then over the coming months when we're really starting to come out of this, then they know it's there to access and they know who to go to. As I said at the beginning, it's really the best thing that we have done is around the culture, and we talk to each other. We're looking out for each other as much as we possibly can, like lots of schools are doing. But just that encouragement that service is there if people do need it. Christian, Mark, sorry, that's all from me. Thank you. Not quite my 5 minutes mark as well, I'm afraid. Usually I talk too much, so tonight that's a little treat for you that I'm going to shut up earlier.
That's fantastic, Lynette. The wine is calling, I can tell. No, that's fantastic. Thank you so much, Lynette. Rob's now going to talk to us about managing our staff workload. So can I hand over to you, Rob? Oh, you're on mute.
Done it. About the fourth time I've not unmuted myself today. So anyway, yes, thank you. And I just want to kind of echo what Lynette said there. This has truly been the most difficult and challenging period, I think, of the entire last year, really, and staff are really feeling it now. And I think, from my own personal perspective, I think that lack of social and cultural kind of input is really taking its toll now. So I am also very much looking forward, and I'm not even sure I'll get through to tomorrow night before I'll be having a glass of wine, but we'll see how we go. So those of you who were at the last of these webinars, I talked about managing large numbers of children in school, and I think probably today I've been asked to talk about managing teacher workload or staff workload. And I think for us, it has been those large numbers of children in school that have made it so difficult for us to really balance out the workload for our staff. And, you know, really, although we're officially closed, it feels very much like usual operational times for us, really, you know, with the numbers of children that we've got in. We've got all of our staff in school. We are actively encouraging them to work from home when they can. But obviously, with the number of children that we've got in school, it does require quite a significant number of people to be in the building. And I think the biggest challenge in terms of workload has been around, in that case, managing the life in school with the virtual life for our children at home. And I think one thing we've really picked up on over the course of the last few weeks is there is a divide, which thankfully hasn't been coming back to us really, but I think between parents outside of school on social media and so on, there is definitely a divide that is growing between those that are coming to school and those that aren't. So that's a big challenge for us when we come back to being all together again, to bring everyone back together. So in terms of staff wellbeing, it kind of came to a bit of a head for us, not wellbeing, sort of workload. It came to a head for us about 2 weeks ago when we were actually having a wellbeing group meeting, which involved the governor and various leaders and other members of staff. And out of that, what kind of came through really clearly was, although we were trying to think about the well-being of our children, the well-being of staff kind of came up as a major priority, really. And it gave us the opportunity to really think, have we got this right at the moment? And although everyone was kind of working hard and moving forward and not complaining, really, I think what people had started to realise was that this was not sustainable, really, to work in this way. And some of the things that came out of it, really, well, what happened was we had this meeting and that got flagged up, and so we called a staff meeting with all staff straight after school, and I asked people to talk really openly and honestly about where they were. And these are some of the things that kind of came out, and it may be reflected in sort of what you've seen as well, really. So people said they were spending a massive amount of time on screen, and they felt that their work now was very much an online kind of existence as well as being in school. They felt that we're never switching off. They felt they were always working, that they were doing 2 jobs at the same time. They very much said that they felt that they were working harder than they'd ever worked before in their entire careers. They were feeling that pressure, I think, in terms of the home learning, feeling like they've got an audience all the time, in terms of feeling like there were parents observing them constantly, really. So massive pressure, and I think the message, although they weren't saying this out loud, I think what came through really clearly to me was we can't sustain this because something's going to crack pretty quickly, really. So we came to an agreement between us about what things we could do to alleviate that stress load, really. And I think the main thing was about how we could establish an equity between what children were getting at school and what they were getting at home. We'd always said it should be as equal as possible, but I think teachers, being teachers, wanted to make sure that children who were in school were getting really good experiences still, and we just felt that wasn't sustainable over the future weeks ahead, not knowing when this was going to end, really. So we've kind of asked them just to dial that down a little bit and just not give them an inferior experience, but just try and kind of make sure that when children were coming to school, they were accessing a similar experience to those that were at home, and not expecting to have a whistles and bells experience at school. So there were reduced expectations. We also talked about being too ambitious in terms of what they were asking of children at home. So reducing the expectation in terms of output, because I think that was one of the things, especially with things like English, that children were producing a lot at home, that then required a lot of feedback and a lot of feedback from teachers. And we also limited the contact time, because I don't know how other colleagues have found it, but that kind of constant messaging and expectation, there was always somebody at the end of the phone line or on the messaging system. So we reduced that to kind of reflect the DFE expectations, that staff would only be available to message for 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours in the afternoon. And then I took my lead from my good friend Sarah Rawnsley there with her Wellbeing Wednesday. So we immediately put in place a Wellbeing Wednesday. I didn't quite know what Sarah's looked like, so we made our own up. but basically that was a reduction in terms of the screen time, the formal teaching time, and kind of stepping back from that kind of more formal kind of approach, really, so that staff could do some pleasant, mindful, calm things with the children that were in school, and encourage children to do that when they were at home as well. So now there's a really clear expectation that staff leave at 4 o'clock on a Wednesday and a Friday. So we're kind of trying to push people out the door so they're not here too late. Our staff meetings, we've kind of just basically just wiped those away for now and just said, you know, we'll have our briefings with a little bit of an update on where we are as a school, but we're not going to have any formal training for a few weeks. And any training that we do during the school day. So we're actually kind of putting in sessions more often so that staff can sign up at a convenient time during the school day. So, for example, we've done a big push on training up for behaviour recently, but we've done it as part of the normal school day rather than after school. And at the moment, any kind of, not that we've done any for a while anyway, but any kind of formal monitoring, staff were really concerned about you know, when that was going to start again. And so we've just tried to reassure people that, you know, until really school is operating more normally, they shouldn't be worrying about us coming in and judging the quality of their provision. You know, it's about the school experience at the moment. So it's early, that's kind of all the stuff that we've put in place. It's early days for us, really, and, you know, we'll have to see how effectively it runs after half term. But I think at the moment, the priority for us is just making sure. I've been muted. I've obviously gone over, it's like the Oscars. The music's going to start playing and I'm off. So it's early days, we'll see how we go. But I think, you know, the important lesson for me was that we took it seriously. We took the messages that were coming through from staff seriously, and we just gave staff the permission at the moment to slow down, take the foot off the accelerator, and take the half-term holiday as fully as they possibly can. I might have talked for a bit longer than 5 minutes. Hopefully that's made up for
That's great, Rob. And it was self-muting. We don't have the technical capabilities of muting you. No, that's great. Thanks so much. And now we're going to hear from John, who's going to be telling us about how you can help children learn when the subject does not lend itself easily to home learning. So just while John comes online, I will read out sort of Dennis's message to Lynette, which is, Lynette, you exemplify what we cover in the Strategic Wellbeing Programme. Amazing. There you go. Amazing. Okay, John, over to you.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Nod.
Yes.
Right, excellent. Right, here. Well, we're nearly there, aren't we? Excellent. But I must admit, actually, we're finishing on a bit of a high, actually. Certainly down at St. Anne's, we set ourselves a challenge this week to try and cycle 1,000 kilometres on some exercise bikes to raise £1,000 for Airedale Hospital. And so far, we've done 1,200 quid. And I think we've cycled 940 kilometres, and I haven't done all of those myself, but I'm a little bit sweaty. I'm just glad you can't smell me over Zoom. I was a little bit sweaty earlier. Anyway, see you later. What am I talking about? Yes, I can remember. So, helping children learn when the subject does not lend itself easily to home learning. So, how do we replicate the classroom when we can't replicate the classroom? How do we teach shape space measures using protractors, DT, art, music at home? Well, we can't, can we, really? We can't replicate the classroom. So we don't just give up. We try our best to reproduce the curriculum that we would have planned for, don't we? You know, that's certainly the, you know, that's our expectation. We try our best. So we get creative. What we've been trying to do is use what's at our disposal. Our primary tool is Google Classroom. That doesn't mean all the tasks involve facing a screen, but that is a method of delivering tasks. We're trying to move away a little bit from screen all day, as you can imagine. I mean, in fact, these 2 days this week, we're having screen-free days, and we've sent home like a menu of tasks for the parents and children to do. But obviously, naturally, because of remote learning, a lot of it does involve staring at a screen, doesn't it? So what do we do for PE? There's the obvious things like, you know, the Joe Wicks, the various YouTube videos. I heard about a school today that's given every child a pedometer, and they're trying to set them tasks. I think the pedometer is only about 80p. So like for 10,000 steps, you get a bronze. For 15,000 you get a silver. I think that's a really nice idea. Kanga Sports, who we use, have given us some good videos. One of our teachers is a fitness instructor, so she's done some Zumba videos. We've got some yoga going on. Our drama teacher has done some lovely drama videos. So again, a lot of that, you don't, with things like the pedometers and setting challenges, you don't have to be facing the screen, but for some of it you do. I mean, as we all know, there's some just amazing stuff on Oak Academy. You know, I looked at one this morning. It was about building a 3D model. I was quite impressed with how, you know, how well it was explained, because that's what it's about, isn't it? It's about the quality of explanation, and some of it on there is absolutely spot on. But with DT and art and things, because a lot of the parents just don't have the stuff at home, so we have put together some craft packs for parents to collect, because a lot of our families just don't have, well, not much at all, you know, unless we give it to them. So we have been putting craft packs home as to do, and we've set, you know, in terms of art, we've set projects about artists like Van Gogh, and go and find out about the art, try and replicate a picture that he may have done. We did some quite nice tasks about explorers. I think it was Neil Armstrong. They had to, I don't know, I think they built the moon lander or things. You see, of course, with everything, it's about that quality of explanation, isn't it? Whether it's live or we use record to slides a lot. I mean, how do you teach a child to use a protractor without using a protractor? I mean, it's hard. Quality of explanation, I've seen some pretty good attempts. But ultimately, if it's something that you can't replicate, don't try, really. You know, wait until the kids come back. I mean, that's what we're trying to do with some of them, switching our topics around. Some of the things that we think just will not fit well for home learning, that we're saving for when the kids come back, hopefully, please God, in a couple of weeks or 3 or 4 weeks or whatever. And I've said to teachers, you know, you're doing your best. Everyone's doing the best. I'm sure everybody's doing the best they can. And don't beat yourself up about it if you don't think you can repeat it at home. But try your best. Give it a go. Get creative. We're certainly a lot better at it now than we were, as I'm sure everybody is here. So that's it for me. Probably around about 5 minutes, I reckon. Okay. Have a good half term. See you later.
Super. Thanks, John. Thanks so much for that. And we'll move straight on to our other John, who's going to be talking to us about risk assessments.
I know. I was just looking back in my notes, and I've had some really fun topics this week. I've had unions, risk assessment. It's all the good ones. So I suppose listening to colleagues speak about wellbeing and that, this actually comes into our approach to risk assessment, and what I think Robert said, I know Sarah said before, and Lynette said about wellbeing, because actually in our risk assessments we focus on our wellbeing and to make them practical and relevant and non sort of time consuming for our staff. So I've got some lovely risk assessments here, and this is the whole risk assessment for home testing. And I mean, the worry about it is always, have you got enough information on that? And I think as leaders, we have such an important job to get these risk assessments in place, yet they can become so consuming for members of staff to follow. That then becomes the problem, and that then compounds onto everything else that's happening, and it's something that then becomes a bigger problem. And so as an academy, I've said before, I'm very lucky that I work for Carlton Academy Trust, and I have a director of facilities and compliance who is an ex-sergeant major. So when we were spoken about the army officers coming to Bradford, we've got our very own one, and Darren's brilliant because he totally gets it. And so when we sit down and we look at the risk assessment, we base it always around 5 sort of key points, and that's we identify the risk really clearly. We spot what the vulnerabilities are of the groups, the people, the staff we've involved at, and then it's about sort of assessing those levels of risk, and also what's the impact on staff? How much is this going to take? And I know I think Sarah's got the exciting topic of lateral flow testing to move on to, and a lot of our tests around this has been creating a lot of sort of concern for us and our staff, and we've rolled out testing to staff last week, and it's it's really fun every day getting dressed into PPE. I feel like I'm playing as a nurse or a doctor every day. But it's very much about getting that in place to support staff, but without it being a sort of a logistical nightmare. So we look at that, at assessing and analysing the risk, and then the control measures we can put in place. But I think what my experience while working with Darren, who's the Sergeant Major, is that we have to have an overview of that. And I've looked online and looked at risk assessments for some schools, and you're seeing 72,000 things that could happen, and they've detailed everything. And you start to realise that's where it becomes problematic. And so what we try and do is scale it all back, look at those control measures, what we can affect, what we can't affect, and then ultimately continually monitor and review. And you're all doing this as you go along, is that dynamic risk assessment. So, when I've got risk assessment for home testing in front of me, I've got the risk assessment for lateral flow testing, which is 2.5 pages. Our site risk assessment a bit bigger, but that's still only 5 pages. And for a site that's, it can contain up to 1,200 kids. That's quite a big issue for us. But again, I think it's the philosophy behind it probably that I would stress to others, is that it's about getting simplistic, keep it simple, so everyone can understand it and that everyone can access it, and realizing that although you might have spent hours and hours writing it, it's not you probably that's going to be dealing with it on a day-to-day basis. So probably there's not a lot I can say to this. I'm sure I can't make it any more exciting, but I am happy. I've just seen a comment there. I'm happy to share it. Rather than bring it up here, I can send it to Christian or Katie. And I'll put our hands up. I don't think it's perfect, but it's really, really got us through this. And I know our trust schools are using it, our primary schools are using it, and everyone has that organisational difference that they change it for them. But if it helps anyone, then I hope it's of use to people, because I think it is scary, some of this some of the bits around testing when you're going into a different world. And I did like the comment from George and Duncan saying that once we've done our training online, which was a really enjoyable hour of my life, I'll never get back, that we're then counted as that we've got experience. But actually, utilising our system, doing the training, I do feel confident now that we can do a decent job and continue to support our staff primarily, but then also our students as we hopefully return when Boris next leaks his next information to the press. We'll find out next week. So.
Super. Thanks so much, John. I've got to say, my approach to risk assessments is find somebody who's already done one and then copy theirs. So I do like the idea of you sharing yours, and I do wonder whether, as a complete outsider, whether there isn't some sort of a shared up sort of a joining of that sort of a type of work that we could facilitate.
Mark, I think Bradford Council have shared one. Obviously, as our trust, we've had someone in place who's done it from our point, but I believe Bradford Council might have shared one as well. So, but yeah, I'm happy to send ours in, and if it's any use to anyone, then that's great.
That's really kind. Even as a starting point, I think these things are invaluable. Thanks so much, John. We're going to move on now. We're not going to save the excitement. We're going to come to Sarah and the lateral flow sort of testing in just a minute. But first, we're going to hear from Beth and Dominic about children with medical needs. So Beth, Dominic.
Hi, I think I'm going to speak about this. We were just going to update really around the aerosol generating procedures. So I think Dominic spoke at one of the first webinars about aerosol generating procedures. And at that point, we thought that any kind of suctioning that happened, whether it be below behind the phalanx or just oral suctioning, would be an AGP, but actually the DFE advice has since been updated, and it's actually only if a young person has a tracheostomy that they need to have that it's still classified as an AGP. So that's when you still need the full PPE of the fit tested mask and the gloves, the apron. For those young people, any of the mainstream schools who do have young people in school that need oral suctioning, while the full PPE isn't needed anymore, I think it's still wise for a risk assessment to be put in place, an individual risk assessment to be put into place for those young people. And what we've certainly done is still kept some of those principles in terms of making sure that the young person is moved at least 2 meters away from any other students, is near a window, so that there's good ventilation at the time that you're doing the suctioning. And then also that we do still actually recommend that they wear PPE, that our staff who are doing that suctioning wear PPE, although they wouldn't wear the fit tested mask, they'd just wear one of the medical grade masks. So I think that kind of covers the changes that there's been to AGP procedures, but just being really aware that we still do need to be careful about if there is suctioning happening in classrooms. And I know that still does count in some of the mainstream schools as well. That's not just purely for specialist settings. And then the other thing, Dominic, was there anything you wanted to add in on top of extra to that?
Only, I think I'd just point out that even just today, I had notification from a school, primary school in the district, where a new child's come into the school since Christmas with a tracheostomy. So they're just at the absolute starting point of understanding the complexity that goes with that, just for one child in a school that hasn't had this difficulty to respond to before. So really just being aware that the situation can always change, and there is good support in the local authority. In particular, the special school heads would be happy to respond. There is a nursing service for special schools, but it has a district-wide brief for picking up responses to children with tracheostomies and aerosol generating procedures. And Julia Elliott, who's the district clinical officer for SEND, has a good overview of this if anyone needs to discuss it with her.
Okay.
Thanks so much, Dominic. Thanks so much, Beth.
Okay. I think the only other thing that we were just going to mention, and I think Duncan touched on this, was around the vaccination programme. And he mentioned the fact that specialist settings, some of the staff have been able to access those vaccinations now. And that's been rolled out to other groups, so it has gone to resource provisions now, where there's young people with profound and sensory physical difficulties. I think the next point is for it to go to the specialist school, specialist settings where there's young people with SEMH needs. And if you have got individual students in your school who you think that their complex needs may mean that some of the staff that are working with them, it's definitely not a blanket policy, but some of those staff may need, may be entitled to the vaccine to be able to protect the young people that they're working with, then you can contact Niall Devlin at the local authority on an individual case to be able to look at whether or not your staff would be eligible for that. So he you know, if you do need to contact and you think that you've got young people where that might be, that having the staff working with them in particular vaccinated would be useful, then do contact him. Okay.
Thanks, Beth. Such useful insights. Thank you. Right. At the moment, we've been waiting for Sarah. Lateral flow testing, new arrangements. Can we ask you to talk to us about that?
Thank you ever so much. Yes, that's like as dry as a bone. Cheers, just before half term. Hello, everybody. Lateral flow testing. So I'm going to ease into lateral flow testing, if I may, because I just wanted to recap on what Lynette and Rob said earlier with regard to well-being, and just give some feedback on something that we've initiated here at Newby. We decided to, well, actually, Gareth, my deputy, had what he likes to call a mermaid moment in the bath, which is a bit spurious. Anyway, we decided to do what's called a Wellbeing Wednesday, based around the 5 ways to wellbeing that the NHS are using, and we're using that with all staff and children. So that's about connection, about physical activity, the idea of giving, learning a new skill, and being present in the moment, i.e. mindfulness. And I just wanted to say that we did this for the first time this week, and it has been phenomenal yesterday, and it took our children away from time, and all our staff had at least half a day of wellbeing time as well, so apart from senior leaders, because we're too knackered and just do everything at the moment. So there we go. But I just wanted to say how important that was and how wonderful it was. So the lateral flow test I gave up a Sunday to watch the webinars from hell that went on for about 5 hours longer than they needed to. I think it's all about not getting sued myself. Anyway, I set up a little action plan for the implementation of the lateral flow devices in school. Pretty much all my staff decided that they would take part. Where I've struggled is with the very small number of staff who have decided not to, and they predominantly were my lunchtime staff. And it is a voluntary basis in the primary school. It's not mandatory. We can't force anybody, but it somehow feels a bit like a selfish act to not. And I've struggled personally with that, because the lateral flow device test, in my mind and in the vast majority of my staff's mind, is to make sure that we are safe to be around other people, as well as having an affirmation almost around our own safety. And when I probed a little deeper, I think it's important that we're all aware of this, when I probed a little deeper about why some of these staff were saying no, it's because there are dreadful, vicious, strange rumours in the community that actually the government are giving out lateral flow device tests that are particularly for certain types of people that actually have COVID on those swabs. So there are people who believe that. And also the other rumour is actually if you dip your swab into milk, and it will give you a positive result. So there is a conspiracy out there, which really worries me. So I've struggled with that. However, the vast majority of our staff, we have a really clear flow now we decided to give out only to those staff who are in school currently. So that's anybody who works within the school, in school currently, not staff who are working virtually at the moment. So the vast majority of my teaching staff are virtual, and I also have a safeguarding attendance and welfare team, the SOAR team, cutting edge, they are working virtually. So anybody who's working in school at the moment is part of that process. We made a decision to test on a Wednesday evening and Sunday evening. We know that the recommendation was to do it in the morning, but I don't have time to sit things down my throat in the morning apart from a cup of tea. So we decided to do it the night before, and then we also, because we use an MIS system, Arbor, we got rid of Sims. Hooray! I'm willing to talk to anybody about Arbor. We can actually, people can self-register a result on our own system in school, as well as the DFE system, which you have to do. We've had no positive LFDs so far. It's all worked extremely well. We're at a point now, next week, there doesn't seem to be a lot of clarity, forgive me if I've missed it, of whether we should be doing the tests next week. So I've said to all my staff, you have your home kits. It's entirely up to you whether you want to do Wednesday or not next week, but you must do Sunday before we return. And I'll probably do the Wednesday, because simply I quite like sticking things down my throat and sticking a swab up my nose. I've got used to it. It's become a habit. So that has worked really, really well in school. Having done the action plan, I was really clear about how we rolled that out. I am the COVID coordinator, and my office manager, the wonderful Linda, is the registration coordinator, or whatever it was called. Quite funny. But I'm not sure where we go with staff who refuse. And I think that's something that some of us will all have, potentially one or two who refuse. And that is a difficult one. And I think we've all struggled a little bit with that. Can I just thank Beth for that news with regard to Niall Devlin, because I do think we have children with EHCPs who require very close contacts and some intimate care or close complex needs. And I think we're all at that point now that the vaccine can't come soon enough. I know that if I get COVID, I could potentially be very affected by COVID because of my lifestyle choices. I love my job, but I'm not prepared to die. That makes sense. And at 54, I think, come on, vaccine, I need it. So I'm still pressured, and I'm still wanting us, and we've spoken to Paul Whiteman, the NAHT, to put the pressure on about having staff in schools vaccinated. I'm very passionate that that needs to happen, and soon. So the lateral flow is working really well here at Newby. It's a dry topic. I've tried to be humorous, but there you go. That's where we're at. Happy to talk to anybody about our Wellbeing Wednesdays, with anybody who'd like to know about it as well.
Super, thanks so much, Sarah. So what a fantastic, thought-provoking set of presentations from our heads. And what we're going to do now is go to breakout rooms where we can sort of talk about some of these sort of topics. We're only going to do it for 10 minutes. We're aware we're standing between you and a tantalizingly close half sort of our term. So Katie's going to do a magic, put us into groups for 10 minutes, then we'll come back here, just very, very quick sort of a wrap up. In your groups, can you please generate some sort of topics to be reported to the back, just so we can make sure the next webinar does what we need it to do. So as I say, Katie will work a magic now. You go into your breakout rooms just for 10 minutes, have a chat, work out some sort of topics, then we'll come back and then let you get one step closer to half term. If I can ask people to just feedback the sort of topics to Christian, so either put them in the chat or shout them out now, or sort of send an email to Christian, just so we've got the sort of topics to focus on for the next website. If there's any last sort of questions, please do put them in the chat. We have had requests from Christian to Sarah to share the Wellbeing sort of a Wednesday with sort of a community. As I say, Christian is reminding everybody that it's an incredible resource, the 50 things before 5. And Katie has let everybody know that we will be circulating all the information to everybody. So if you can put the comments in the chat to Christian, or email, or shout them out now, or stay online so you can let sort of Christian know. Otherwise, huge thank you. I think there is light at the end of the tunnel now. It's been an amazing privilege to be part of this incredible sort of a group. As I say, it's just so heartwarming to see every part of the system come together to do what we can for the children and young people. So do enjoy your half terms, so deserved. Have a fantastic, relaxing time, and we'll say goodbye now. So goodbye. Anybody who does want to feedback a topic to Christian, please stay online. Thank you. Bye-bye.